Good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us for our Loneliness and Connection webinar. My name's Nicole Core. I'm the Marketing Director here at Medigold Health and I head up our webinar programme. Delighted to say that we've had around about 600 plus registrants for today's webinar, so it's obviously a topic close to people's heart. I'll just run through a quick housekeeping slide. You'll be delighted to know you're not visible to us during the webinar. You're not visible to us, you're not visible to any of the other audience members. So you can do what you like, you can sit back, eat your lunch, enjoy. You cannot be seen. In terms of communicating with the panel throughout, we've got two little boxes, important boxes at the bottom of your screen. So there's the Q&A. If you have any questions that you'd like me to ask the panel at the end of the session, we've got around about a 15-minute Q&A session at the end. Please pop them in there. And we've got our very own question facilitator working in the background to organise those. But we've also got live chat as well. So a lot of our webinars are very engaging. And what we love is that the audience engage with each other on the live chat. And you will be asked by Dr. Judith and Alice throughout to drop in some shared experiences or any tips as well. So please feel free to pop stuff in the chat. The session is being recorded, as you will have heard at the start, and the recording will be uploaded to our YouTube channel. You will also receive a link via email tomorrow to the recording. Feel free to share that far and wide. As I say there, we always make time for Q&A at the end. And these webinars are a taster of the commercial products that we have available because we've got a suite of training services available. So we don't actually share the slides because they are commercial product, but we do share the recording. And I think without any further ado, I will put myself on mute and hand over to our lovely panel. Judith?
So yeah, I had to find the unmute button. I'm not familiar with Zoom, so that's my first challenge, trying to find all the right buttons. So hello everyone, welcome and glad you are joining us today for our webinar. My name is Judith. I'm a clinical psychologist and I'm the head of the mental health services here at Medigold.
Thanks, Judith. And I'm Alice Gibson. I am here representing lots of different teams. So I'm a disability training consultancy specialist, as well as a workplace needs assessor and strategy coach. So thank you for having us. And Dr. Judith Bird is going to get us started. Good. Have fun.
So I will do the first part, but before we get into the content, wanted to take a minute to frame how this webinar is going to work today, so you know where we're heading. So in the first part, I'll be speaking about understanding loneliness at work, what it actually is, what it isn't, why it affects people so deeply, especially the link to our modern working life. And in the second part, I'll hand over to my colleague Alice, and Alice will focus on the more like the practical side of things, what organizations and individuals can actually do to foster real connection at work, and she'll bring in some more interaction as well. So if we are thinking as we go along, this makes sense, but what do we do about it? Hold that thought. That's exactly where we're going. So to start us off, why talking about loneliness now? Well, we're coming into the festive season. It's a time that's often associated with togetherness, warmth, connection. And yet for a lot of people, this is when loneliness becomes most noticeable. There's often a gap between what we think we should be feeling and what we're actually experiencing. And that gap, that matters psychologically. So before we go any further, I want to say this really, really clearly. Loneliness is really common. We dip in and out of it throughout our lives. It's really a very human experience, and it's not a personal failure. So specifically when we talk about loneliness in this webinar, we're talking and focusing much more on the structure and the systems around it that might cause or promote loneliness, or that we can kind of like manipulate to and design in a better way to foster more connection. So loneliness touches all areas of life. And while in this webinar, we'll focus on the workplace specifically, I do want to reassure everyone that we are all aware, obviously, loneliness can exist on multiple levels and in but for the purpose of, you know, the time constraints today, we focus on the workplace. So before we dive in, I would like to invite you to do a quick poll. Nicole will launch that in a minute, and you will see a question pop up. How connected do you feel at work right now? So just please choose the option that feels closest.
Can you
Nicole?
see the poll? I think because 133 of you have taken part in that already. Can you see
Oh,
it, Judith?
I can't see it, but that's perfect if everybody has already taken part in it. I just can't see it. I can't see the results. So you might have to feed that back to me.
Yes, I can certainly see I can read out the results so far. So thank you. We're nearly up there with the amount of people. We've now got 148 people have taken part. So far, 41% are saying fairly connected. Most days are good. 32% are saying a bit disconnected. I dip in and out. 15%, oh, this is nice, are saying really connected. I feel part of things. And 12% are saying pretty isolated. It's been tough lately.
Okay. So thank you guys for sharing that also openly. And it's really important to remember that feeling disconnected is really common, really human. It's not a personal failing. And hopefully what we're going to go through in the webinar is going to give you a bit more information about what we can all do to help each other and help ourselves as well. So the good news is that connection can be built, and that's exactly what we're here to explore together today. So can we move to the next slide, Nicole? Thank you. So when we talk about loneliness, it's really easy to misunderstand it. Loneliness doesn't mean being alone, and it certainly doesn't mean this is just an individual, a thing that rests on the individual shoulders. And one of the clearest psychological definitions describes loneliness as the perceived gap between the relationships we have and the relationships we want, particularly in terms of the quality of these relationships, not the quantity. And what that tells us is that loneliness is about feeling connection, not about the number of people in our lives. And a really crucial factor in this model is also one of the bubbles at the end where it says cognition and attribution. This is a really a crucial factor in this model because what it means is how we interpret a situation and what beliefs we hold about ourselves and the world around us. And this is also a link to mental health and mental health problems. If we're experiencing poor mental health, we may look at ourselves and the world around us in a more negative way, and therefore we could be more likely to feel lonely and disconnected. So you can be busy all day, in meetings all day, working with other people all day, and you can still feel lonely. And you can even enjoy your work and still feel disconnected. And that's because loneliness isn't measured from the outside. It's subjective. It's measured on the inside through how safe, how seen, and how supported we feel. So can we go to the next slide? So going a little bit further into that distinction is really, really important because a lot of well-intentioned solutions might miss the mark. Loneliness is not the same as isolation. Isolation is objective. It's about fewer interactions. It's about working alone. It's about being physically separated from others. Again, being alone can often be a neutral state. It can be, you can be alone by choice, by design. It can feel rejuvenating at times to have some me time and be alone. So loneliness is a subjective state. It's about how your interactions feel. And you can, for example, aim to reduce isolation by increasing the contacts you have, but that might not necessarily mean you reduce the feeling of loneliness. So, for example, adding more meetings, more check-ins, more social events doesn't necessarily help if those interactions feel rushed or transactional or unsafe. So loneliness often sounds like, I don't feel seen here. It sounds like, I wouldn't know who to talk to if I struggled, or I don't quite feel I belong. And emotionally, loneliness often carries quiet discomfort and self-blame. People rarely say, I feel lonely at work. More often, they just disengage much more quietly. So that brings us on to the next slide. where before I want to talk about what loneliness does to people, I want to introduce a really simple framework that helps make sense of it. And that's called the biopsychosocial model. You don't need to remember the name, it's the idea that matters. So in this model, it's stipulated that the human experience is shaped by 3 interacting systems: your body, what's happening in your mind, and what's happening in your social environment. And loneliness, as many, many other experiences that we have, affects all 3 of them at once. And the workplace sits in the social environmental section, but also crosses into the other sections as well, because there's an overlap. So the next slide, please. So when seen through the biopsychosocial lens, loneliness makes a lot of sense. Biologically, ongoing loneliness activates your stress system. Sleep can suffer, energy drops, stress hormones stay elevated. Psychologically, people become more sensitive to social threat. Neutral situations can feel personal or rejecting. And on a behavioral level, people often pull back, they withdraw, not because they don't want connection, but because connection starts to feel really risky. And really interesting, in neuroscience studies have shown that the social pain that comes with loneliness, for example, or other social situations like, rejection and other, so social pain is processed in very similar pathways to physical pain. It activates the same neural pathways in the brain on imaging studies that we can see as physical pain. So in a recent, to bring this all into context as well, in terms of like the impact it has on health, in the most recent World Health Organization report on the impact of loneliness, the impact on loneliness on health has been put at the same level as if you're smoking 15 cigarettes a day. So that's just a stat to highlight, loneliness, even though it's felt, it's subjective, it's kind of like something everybody experiences on the inside, can have the same effect on your health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. Let that sink in. Now, let's move on to a little bit of data to kind of like highlight how big of a problem it is. So if it is, obviously it has severe health impacts. Globally, the picture is that around 1 in 6 people report significant loneliness at least once in their life. Now, it can affect all age groups, but we do definitely see a trend of higher risk among younger age groups and populations that are facing marginalization, and those from low-income countries, and among people that are experiencing discrimination. So there's definitely some risk groups that can be identified. Now, very often we can hear now loneliness being described as an epidemic, but the reality is a little bit more nuanced. Loneliness is definitely not a new thing, and it's not a virus, but we use the medical language around it. It's definitely widespread if you look at the numbers. And because it has such a profound impact on our physical and mental health and on quality of life in general, that's why the World Health Organization treats social connection now as a public health priority. That brings us to our next slide, where we also see that loneliness doesn't raise in a straight line everywhere. There's definitely some pockets and some populations and some risk populations. The rates vary by country and by social conditions, as we said before. And it's very, very important that we really pay attention that younger age groups report significantly higher rates of loneliness than older age groups. In fact, we see a bit of a trend of we have really high rates in younger age groups. Loneliness rates come down then in midlife, and then in older age groups, we have a second peak, not as high as in the younger age groups, but we seem to have a two-wave pattern going through life. Now, looking more closely at the UK, nearly half of adults in a recent poll by the Campaign to End Loneliness at least some of the time. Now, if you do the maths from that poll and you add it up to the total population, that would mean about nearly 26 million people feeling lonely in the UK. So it's definitely widespread. And when an experience is this widespread, it points away from it being an individual weakness, and towards shared systems and environments. And therefore, the priority going forward has to be placed on practical prevention and actionable strategies. Bit more stat on the next slide, because obviously loneliness has a link with mental health as well. And this is an opportunity to take stock of the most recent UK mental health data from the big mental health report by Mind. The prevalence of mental health problems remains high, with younger people being much more affected across all age groups. And that's interesting because we also see that the loneliness rates are much higher in these age groups. Excuse me. So when your mental health is poor, going back to, remembering that first slide about that model of loneliness, your cognition and attribution, which means your beliefs about yourself, the beliefs about the world around you, might be more negative. And therefore, we are more likely to feel lonely in those situations. That's the link to mental health here. But it also can work the other way. Being lonely, a lack of meaningful social connections can mean we have no one to talk to. And that might mean our mental health problems fester, they become worse over time. So we can move on to the next slide, where we now get into the workplace, really, and some of the changes in modern life that we have recently had. So the shift to remote working practices, we're having a remote webinar today, has meant lots of flexibility, accessibility, balance, autonomy for many, many people. But what it has also done, it has severed our links to form informal connections more easily. And that's why we have to deliberately design for it. And this really is a two-lane highway here, where employers needing to provide the right structures, but we as remote workers and participants also have to be aware of the risks for our style of working, for modern life, and have to make sure that we think more closely about the relationships in our lives. So again, to reiterate, loneliness at work is not about distance. It's about not feeling seen. It's about not belonging. But, being more isolated can definitely make it more likely that you can feel lonely. The other important key factor here is the thing is that our nervous system responds to our interpretation of a situation, not the intention. So moving on to, I'm so sorry, I have a bit of a cold and I know I'm wearing a microphone here. So if I cough into everybody's ears, I do apologize. So the next slide is looking a little bit closer around workplace and how loneliness can look in the workplace. So workplace loneliness reflects an unmet need for belonging and recognition in a place where most of us spend a significant portion of our waking hours. For a lot of people, it's 8-9 hours a day, sometimes more. And then the rest of the day, most of our social interactions take place at work for most of us. So two people can have very different experiences in the same team, depending on, their identity, history, and psychological safety. It stems from the sense of loneliness stems from a lack of meaningful and supportive social connections as work, and that core social need is not being met. Workplaces have a lot of influence to design systems and structures that promote social connection, sense of belonging within their teams, and that can really boost morale and engagement, and as an effect, overall organizational performance. So let's look at some common traps that can be waiting in the workplace. So in general, most employers and workplaces don't produce loneliness on purpose. It is something that just comes up because some situations are just naturally set up to feel a bit more disconnected. Really common areas include very transactional remote work, where fragmented shift patterns are present, or people on short-term contracts, but also the isolation at senior levels. Senior levels and loneliness also applies to minorities. So for example, employees with disabilities or those from underrepresented groups can be more affected in that sense. These are all structural patterns, not individual failures. So this is where really from a workplace point of view, we can really make a change here. So to reiterate, before I hand over to Alice, loneliness is not a weakness, it's not a diagnosis, it's a personal experience. It's a biopsychosocial signal telling us something important about how work is or can be designed. And now I hand over to Alice, who will focus on the practical ways and how to foster real connection at work.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Judith. That was really helpful. Hello, everyone. So what you can see on the screen is the circles of support. Okay. Now, it's a really useful way of understanding different types of relationships that we might have in our lives, and importantly, how each of those different types of relationships can protect us from feelings of isolation or loneliness, depending on which word we identify with best. Now, loneliness and isolation, it doesn't just happen when we lack people altogether, exactly like Judith said, but it can also occur when the balance that we have with these circles is disrupted, or when certain types of connections are missing. Okay, so firstly, we've got the circle of intimacy. That's, usually people that we feel deeply close to. So people that we trust and feel safe being vulnerable with, importantly. And that tends to include, close family members, our partners, or lifelong friends. And, if that circle's small or if it changes, if there's a bereavement or a significant life transition, feelings of loneliness can be especially more intense because that's where our emotional safety tends to sit. You've then got your circle of friendship, and that's our good friends. It's the people we spend time with socially, the people that we share experiences with and, have lots of fun being around. It might not be our closest confidants, as it were, but they do contribute significantly to our sense of belonging and our sense of fun, that sort of thing. So if that circle becomes quiet or maybe less active, you might not feel deeply isolated, but you can start to feel a bit disconnected or maybe left out, and then that can escalate. The third is our circle of participation. It's our acquaintances, familiar faces. That's where your colleagues or your classmates, maybe neighbours, people that you do your hobbies with, or people that you say hi to on a dog walk every day in your regular routine. Those interactions might feel small, but they do provide this structure and routine and just generally make us feel part of something that is greater than ourselves. So if participation drops, linking into what Judith said, maybe remote work, or if there's a major life change, loneliness can increase simply because we've just got fewer social encounters. And finally, and honestly, it's the last but not least kind of situation, you've got the circle of exchange. Now, that circle includes people who provide services or professional support. Might be medical professionals, might be support workers, or people in other formal roles. And while those relationships aren't personal in the same way, they can still be incredibly meaningful, especially for people with limited social contact elsewhere. So if you look at your life through these circles, you can start to understand maybe why we might feel lonely or isolated and where those feelings come from. So it can help us identify, not just who is in our life, but maybe where the gaps are. So you might be the sort of person that's got loads of acquaintances, but not many close friends, or really strong intimate relationships, but not much wider participation. If you recognize where those gaps are, that can be the first step towards rebuilding a sense of connection. Okay. So if we look at the next slide, please. Before we can really look at what can be done to support someone who might be feeling lonely, or recognize and respond to our own feelings, just take a moment to think about the factors that could increase the likelihood of feeling lonely on a personal or an individual level. Transitions are massive. Things like starting education, leaving education, they can be major turning points for lots of people. Many people leave or even lose their social networks that you're used to, and you might have to form new relationships. And let's face it, that process isn't always quick or easy. Starting a new job as well, that can have a really similar impact. It can be daunting, and it does take time to get used to new people and settling into a new environment. And for some people, it involves relocating. That's just an extra layer of challenge, isn't it? Because you can move around and then suddenly be quite far from any existing support networks. We've then got things like loss and change in our personal lives to consider. That can play an absolutely enormous role. So if you're experiencing a bereavement or a breakdown in relationship, that might have moved someone away from your circle of intimacy. And that kind of loss can leave an enormous emotional gap. And that in itself is then strongly linked to loneliness. Care and responsibilities, that can change how we connect with people. Might be having a child or taking on care and responsibilities for relatives. And that, let's be really honest with ourselves, it reduces the time and energy, frankly, that you've got available for socializing and not just making new friends, but maintaining existing friendships. And even short periods of loneliness can start to affect a person's confidence and their self-esteem. That's huge, because if confidence drops, reaching out to people, starting conversations, building new connections, that can be really challenging. And that's then creating a bit of a vicious cycle that's really, really difficult to break. We need to consider things like people's experiences. We looked at the stats, people experiencing discrimination, bullying, exclusion, all of that can lead to feelings of isolation, especially if someone's been targeted because of a protected characteristic, maybe that can create fear and reluctance and just feeling like you don't belong. And for lots of people, there can be a bit of a stigma around admitting to loneliness. Again, we looked at those stats. I don't think people would necessarily say that to a human being, which is difficult in itself. So that can make reaching out for support feel even more challenging. Alongside those things, we also need to consider the impact that having a disability or a health condition can have just to maintain social connections. Communication might be affected. There might be physical barriers to negotiate, like access to public or community spaces. And if someone is adjusting to maybe a new diagnosis, it might feel difficult to return to what they considered to be a normal life or find that new normal. Health conditions that limit mobility, or require remote working, that then can reduce day-to-day contact with colleagues, and that's further increasing the risk of disconnection. Plus practical barriers, transport, that can make a huge difference. If you live in a rural area like me, or rely on public transport, that can restrict access to loads of things like work, social events, community activities. And finally, and this kind of links in a little bit to our next webinar that we've got coming up on the 7th, you need to think about financial pressures and everything that comes from that. So if you've got limited disposable income, that can make social activities less affordable. I mean, it's Christmas, isn't it? It's a really expensive time of year. If we're struggling financially, then you might be turning down invitations to things or stepping back from hobbies, and that's then bringing potential housing uncertainty, and that's just adding another layer of isolation and worry. And although our focus today is the workplace, it's really important to recognize that our colleagues might be experiencing any number of these life circumstances, and when they are, they're at risk of feeling isolated or feeling lonely, even if everything looks fine on the surface. So I think it's important for us to consider the kind of things that we could do to invite opportunities for connection in the workplace. And I'm really interested in people's weird and wonderful ideas. So we've got some suggestions up on the screen, but I want to know if anyone's got anything that they might naturally do to invite these opportunities for connection. So if you're comfortable in doing so and you haven't got your sandwich in your hand, using the chat function, what sort of stuff do you think you could actually do to connect with people in work? So I've got the chat up, and we'll see if anyone has got any suggestions for us. Especially if you're working remotely. I'm always really interested in hearing people's remote work suggestions. So we've got a great one coming through, staff networks. Absolutely love staff networks. Thank you, Alison. So the opportunity to do 2 volunteer, that's not a word, volunteer days per year. Absolutely love that. And had a team day out in the community. Really good for staff morale and bonding. Yeah, absolutely love that. I love it when we have the opportunity to meet people that we see virtually every single day in person. Although I'm the only one who lives in South Wales, it usually involves a train ride for me. This is fantastic. Various cafe stops for people to network. Love that. Any excuse to have a coffee. People rotate chairs. Do you know what? I love that. Someone said to me recently that they have random coffee mornings where they link up with people in the business that in theory they would have no reason to communicate with. And I love those kinds of suggestions. Charlie says you have a monthly quiz. I love that, Charlie, but I'm incredibly competitive. And I don't like me when I'm being competitive. So maybe quizzes are off for me. Christmas conference, love that. People have Christmas parties. I think that's awesome as well. And people having awareness days, Friday calls, informal. Oh my goodness, there's loads of stuff coming through. We have sort of daily stand-ups. Yeah, I love that. It's about being sociable. My training and consultancy team, we have Wednesday coffee mornings where work talk is basically banned, and we just chat nonsense for 30 minutes. And those are the kinds of things that keep us all connected. It's what we know about each other, and we're human beings. Those kinds of things are super important in a remote world as well, because let's face it, if we all worked in the office, we would be chatting with people over coffees and not talking about work. So some really, really good suggestions in there, folks. Thank you so much for contributing. Please feel free to keep posting stuff in there as well when I start talking, because it's always nice. You might get some ideas from other people in the chat as well. But to go through some of the suggestions, I suppose, that I've got up on the screen. And also, we've just mentioned a few of these. So inclusive team meetings are really important. And I've highlighted where everyone gets a chance to speak, okay? Because these meetings don't have to be about where info just gets thrown at us. Information is just constantly pushed out. We want spaces where everyone is comfortable to talk. So even if that's just brief check-ins where people share personal updates or personal wins, that can make people feel seen and included, and that's incredibly important. We had a few suggestions there, cross-departmental working. That can be great because it's collaborating, beyond your immediate teams. That's why I love these webinars, because I get to speak to people who I wouldn't necessarily speak to on a day-to-day basis. These kinds of things can really broaden your network in a really natural way. And if you think back to those circles of support, that's adding more people into our circle. We've got forums and message groups. Obviously in the chat there, we had stuff about networks as well. They can be incredibly powerful if they're used intentionally and properly, whether that's shared interest channels or safe spaces for problem solving. Those kinds of platforms can help people connect in ways that aren't limited by boring stuff like geography and people's schedules. Same with outside conferences. We had some great suggestions there. Actually attending events that can spark new conversations, create shared learning experiences. And again, we can expand our network, get to know people as human beings and not just colleagues. And I think that's really important. And then linking into the external stuff, whether that is participating in, online communities or professional networks, that can then reduce a sense of isolation by just reminding you really that you're connected to people on a much wider professional level in a professional world. And, often we feel like we're stuck in our own bubble a little bit. So that can burst and give us a bit of a reminder. And I love it. This is always my favorite, encouraging positive feedback and praise. I think it's so important. It is really little, but it's incredibly impactful. It's recognizing effort, whether that's publicly or privately. It strengthens relationships, and it builds trust and boosts confidence and self-esteem. It just tells people, you matter, what you do matters. I see you, I see what you're doing. And that alone can significantly reduce feelings of loneliness and isolation. So that's just like a few structured ways that you can build connection, and none require huge resources. They just require, intention. And there are a few ways that you can build that immediate connection in work in a social sense. You've got buddies and mentors. That's pairing people up, especially new starters or people moving into new roles. It helps people feel supported right from day one, and it gives them a safe person that they can ask questions or share information with. I'm still to this day best friends with the first person I was ever buddied up with in my first job when I was 17. I've literally just come back from Lithuania with that person, and it was fantastic. I had a great holiday. But in theory, looking back, there's no reason for me to have made that relationship with that person. There's no reason for us to work together. It's an entirely different part of the business. And my life would look very different if it wasn't for that initial buddy mentor system. So I think that's amazing. And make good use of the environment, lunchrooms, staff rooms. When you do work in an office, that's great. You don't have to just eat in there. They can be natural, safe spaces, places for people to chat, and it's little touches, people sharing tables and having maybe informal drop-ins in there. It can just encourage people to step away and connect. And social events, like we were saying in the chat, they play a huge role. They don't need to be elaborate outings. We don't need ballrooms and champagne. Sometimes just small, zero pressure gatherings like coffee mornings or quizzes, like we were saying in the chat, they can help people connect outside of the standard structure of work. And team building, again, in the chat, is a really valuable tool. If it's planned well, it can build trust and get people to collaborate with each other. And it just gives people a chance really to interact in different ways, ways that they wouldn't usually in their day-to-day roles. And then finally, to sort of link it all back, we do need to be intentional about connecting with our remote and our lone workers. There's loads of ways that we can do it. Might be virtual drop-ins, regular one-to-ones, or, appropriate dedicated chat spaces. The key there is just ensuring that people feel like they're actually part of maybe like the rhythm. I know that sounds a bit cheesy, but the rhythm of the team, and not left on the outside looking in, which is a really good way really of us considering loneliness as a topic. And together, all of us, these sort of strategies, they can help create a workplace where connection isn't just left to chance or left to individuals. It's actually built in to how we work and how we communicate and how we support each other. Okay. So let's also think now about how we can be connected to our existing circles and how we can build those new connections. So we're bringing it back to those circles of support. So I've got a few like quick everyday actions that can make a big difference. And pick up the phone instead of sending a text or an email. So a 30-second phone call, can build more connection than an essay. To clarify, please don't do that to me because I will hate it. I don't like it when people call me without texting me to tell me that they're going to. So not everyone likes that, but some people absolutely love it. So bear that in mind. You can reach out to people that you've lost touch with. Just like a simple, hey, how's it going? Can reopen that door. Lots of people don't do that because they think, oh, it's weird. I haven't spoken to them for years. I promise you it's not weird. I've done a bit of a social experiment recently where if I think of someone, doesn't matter how long it's been since I last spoke to them, I will message them and tell them that I've thought of them. Or if I've got their address, I'll send them a postcard. And I genuinely have now strengthened some friendships that I've had for such a long time. I'm going out this evening with my school friends who I haven't seen in maybe 10 years, just because I popped a message and said, hey, I thought of you today, and it's done something amazing. And say hello, or hello, however you want to say it, just to someone new. It doesn't need to be a full conversation. Just acknowledging people, matters. It makes them feel like a less of a non-playable character, I suppose. Ask people about their weekend and actually engage. Love that. Show interest, not just small talk. That's kind of about actively listening. Yeah. So when you ask how someone is and then listen. It's not the automatic, oh, are you okay? Yeah, all right. It's that genuine moment of connection. You know, the difference between listening and actively listening is one uses your ears, and the other uses your brain. You know, it's actually hearing what the other person has to say. You can share information about your hobbies and interests. Doesn't matter what it is. I love books and going to the gym. Some people love Warhammer, and gaming. You know, common ground does spark connection, but even if you're not interested, sometimes if you know what someone's into and you ask them about it, it just, again, it makes them feel real and human, makes them feel like you care, because these tiny little actions can have a massive impact. You know, they're everyday habits that help connection become part of our culture, and that's ultimately what we're trying to do here. So as we move in to this very Christmassy time of year, it's important for us to recognize that this season can amplify many of the issues that affect our mental health and our mental well-being, loneliness being, as we've seen, one of the most common. So while lots of people will look forward to the social side of Christmas, other people will experience this period as a reminder of limited connection and loss, you know, especially if they live alone or something's happened in the last year and won't be around people during the break. So this is our final focus. How can we stay connected and help other people feel connected over the Christmas period? It might be, you know, reaching out more intentionally, checking in with people who've got potentially fewer opportunities for social interaction, or just simply being mindful that not everybody experiences the Christmas season in the same way. So as you can see on the slide, there are loads of simple ways that you can help yourself and other people stay connected over Christmas. Some people host events, yeah, whether it's something small like a coffee morning or a film night. Just create that welcoming space so that, you know, people who might not have many plans have the opportunity to do something fun. And if that feels like too much, I'm not saying you need to suddenly host a full open house. You know, arranging to meet up to an existing event can be just as meaningful. Yeah, shared experiences, it makes connection a lot easier, and it's more natural as well. And, you know, for many of us, virtual connections, they're also incredibly valuable. It might be a quick video call or, you know, an online catch up that can just bridge a huge gap and help people feel included, especially if they can't meet in person. Let's think back to those early 2020 days where everyone was having a Zoom quiz. I absolutely loved a Zoom quiz. So those are still options, folks. We can still do that. And it is worth looking out for community events, depending on where you live. There's some really cool stuff going on at the moment. There might be local groups and libraries and charities. You know, they often run inclusive activities, and they can be a lifeline for anyone who feels isolated and feels like they want to get out. And I suppose finally, it is the season of giving, you know, helping other people. So whether that's through small acts of kindness or volunteering. You know, my street, we do Christmas dinners. You just cook Christmas dinners for local people. That's loads of fun. That can help build connection from all sides. So if you're supporting someone else, you know, that can give you a sense of purpose and belonging. And it's this shared humanity that just makes us feel good. And I know these things sound simple, but really they're thoughtful ways that we can make the Christmas season feel more connected, so that we can feel more ourselves and help the people around us feel more themselves as well. So before we go to the Q&A, I'm going to invite you in the chat to just tell me, what is one thing your team could do to boost connection before Christmas? If you want to make it Christmassy, you are absolutely more than welcome to do so. So I've got the chat up, and let's see if anyone's going to do it. I've got an elf costume. I'm not entirely sure I'm willing to subject my team to me dressed as an elf, but we'll see how that goes. So if anyone's got any suggestions, please pop them in the chat.
I'm hosting the annual Medigold Christmas quiz next Monday online. So that is always very popular and a great way for connecting people across different departments. And then you find out what general knowledge people have or don't have. It's good. It's really fun, actually.
Oh, I love that.
And the competitive spirits.
Competitive, yes. Yeah. Oh, there is some real competitive there's some
Can't adjust.
regulars.
I know, it's why I can't engage like that. I don't want people to see me for who I truly am.
I'm
Um,
loving this team elf on the shelf. People just put that.
I too think
I
that's
feel like
fantastic.
I missed a trick here. Our team would have been awesome with this.
Yeah, absolutely. But someone does a free raffle for all the employees on site, and I love that.
Love
Um,
that.
that sounds like loads of fun. Lots of people go out for team Christmases as well, whether that's for like lunch or dinner, and then judging people on how they cook their steak. I quite like doing that. Um, there's loads of stuff. There's actually a comment in the chat that I really do want to draw attention to, and it's
Mhm.
just thank you, Elaine. A suggestion from Elaine to be mindful when we're inviting people to Christmas events. Particularly if they've had difficult years or there's been challenging life events, because not everyone wants to play nice and engage in the fun. So I think that's a really important comment that you made there, Elaine. There's loads of stuff in the chat, folks, and I really do appreciate all of your contributions. And I hope everyone here has been reading other people's ideas as well, and you're gonna nick some. But thank you. So that's my part. I'm gonna pass you back to Nicole.
Okay, lovely. Thank you both so much. I found that fantastic. And so did our audience by the looks of it, because we've had lots of lovely bits in the chat there. And I've we've got some questions. If we've got some time, I've got about 6 questions. So we'll go through those. Savita and Sophie have both raised quite a similar question around how would you recognize loneliness? Is there any advice for how they could approach somebody that they're perhaps thinking is perhaps not okay? Or have you got any advice on how to start these conversations in the workplace? Because like you said, Alice, it might not be something that people outwardly say. Loneliness can come with a bit of stigma. So what's some advice about kind of starting that conversation if you're concerned about somebody?
Yeah. I mean, Judith, is there anything you'd want to say to that?
But probably just one thing. I think the clearest sign that somebody is probably feeling lonely is when they withdraw. So if you notice that they're not behaving as they're used to, that they're not engaging in, events, conversations and team meetings as usual, that's probably your most secure kind of like sign. Other than that, it is just asking the questions and keeping the conversation up. Alice, what would you say?
I think behavioral changes sort of going alongside what you're saying. So changes in behavior aren't necessarily individually red flags. It's more an accumulation of things that we can notice. And in a virtual world, even when you don't talk to people regularly, you can usually tell when there are these changes based on their communication style. Something as simple as how they react to things that maybe they would have reacted to in a more positive light, and also maybe the way that they're talking and phrasing things. Some people tend to talk more negatively and pass things off as jokes.
Mm.
So maybe let's just read into what people are saying, and you can always utilize the ask twice technique if you're not sure. So if you ask someone if they're okay and they say yeah, but you don't 100% think they're answering that question 100% honestly, then ask again. Ask exactly the same question.
Maybe to clarify as well, is you can't be entirely sure that this is loneliness that is the problem. It is just like Alice said, it could be a range of problems, but loneliness might be one. So, you need to have that conversation and explore to find what the root is, what the cause is, and then you can engage and offer the support that is needed.
Absolutely.
Thank you both. Elaine's just asked as well, just as general about wanting to keep the chat because there's so many brilliant ideas. So I'll see what we can do there. See if I can either download it and send it out with the recording or summarize some of these themes that have come through. But that's great because that's you guys. And so thank you so much for all your wonderful ideas. This is a great one, and a couple of people have mentioned about shift workers. So can you elaborate on the connection between shift working, permanent nights, and the likelihood to experience loneliness, and how employers can best support colleagues in operations and shift-based roles? I don't know who wants to pick that one up.
I can start with that, Alice, if you're...
Yeah.
That's a really interesting question, because I think shift work has like a lot of different problems in terms of like the interventions that and support solutions that we have available that don't really neatly apply to shift work as much as they do to office work. So I think the problem with loneliness is not only loneliness at work. So you can be shift working, and you can be having your problem with loneliness more in your private life than in your work life. So it's not necessarily kind of like a workplace solution that might be helping you. So you might feel quite connected at work with the colleagues that you're on shift with, for example, but then you actually find that your personal relationships have suffered and you don't have enough time to actually build the same type of relationships in your personal life because of the shift nature of your work. So that's a really tricky one, and you need to kind of like have those conversations with your workplace as well. You know, what you need, what kind of support do you need to kind of like bolster your personal relationships as well. If it is more in the workplace, if you say, well, actually, you know, the people that I'm on shift with, you know, I feel quite disconnected, there's different measures that you can take that then apply, that they're much more like the suggestions that we've been going through, you know, connecting, finding some kind of like shared meaning and belonging. The reason for loneliness is the not belonging part of it, not so much that I don't have enough people around me. It's more that I don't belong. I don't have a sense of belonging into this group. Maybe that gives a bit of a framework, and Alice might have some more practical advice on that as well.
Well, I wouldn't say it's so much practical advice. I mean, as far as the work side of things is concerned, you know, what I've been talking about a lot is what we are maybe personally responsible for, or things that we can actually change ourselves when we look at our circles of support. But lots of things do come from an organizational perspective as well, because, you know, clearly if shift work is a very natural part, then that is something that does need to be considered at an organizational level. But kind of just to echo what Dr. Judith Bird was saying there, is that if you're feeling that way, it doesn't necessarily mean that work is the root cause of said issue. You know, we might be feeling that way in various aspects of our lives, no matter how many people are around us. So that's it, bringing it back to us and trying to assess, well, what is going on within our own circles? Is there anything that I can personally influence? And then seeing if there's a way that we can sort of tackle it from that angle as well.
Fantastic, thank you. I'm just hoping the background noise suppression is on, because my dog is making a lot of noise.
Yeah.
And dogs are brilliant ways actually to combat loneliness as well.
Just get a dog. Get a dog.
They're always
That's
there.
the
They're
final piece of
always
advice.
there. So somebody here, Ryan, thank you, is looking to implement a strategy at work to improve the health and well-being and connection of their staff. And they're working with the looking at improving it with the local community, which is a great idea, actually. So any starting points or must-haves to consider for the entire workforce in terms of implementing a strategy with connecting with the local community? Love that, Ryan.
No pressure, Ryan. But I think, Ryan, actually, if you look at the chat, there are some great suggestions in there with how can we get back to the community? What are our volunteering policies? Are there ways for us to get out? Because that's then connecting with each other, but that's also giving back. It's a sense of purpose, which is something that as human beings, you know, has a significant influence on our well-being. So I would say that was actually a really good starting point, to be honest. Thanks to everyone in the chat who suggested that.
Yeah, that's a really, really good point. And I also want to add to that, if you're kind of like looking at a more organizational strategy, make sure you embed employee feedback at many, many points when you're implementing that, to kind of like make sure that what you're putting out there and the kind of like support you want to put in place is actually what is needed and what is wanted. And put those questions in as well around, you know, belonging, around loneliness as well. So what helps you feel included? What kind of support would you need more of? Or kind of like just putting the question out there that just very, very bluntly goes at, you know, do you feel a sense of belonging at work? Is there something missing? So when you know where, you know, you have your gaps at work, if you're implementing a strategy, I always say, ask employees, work with the, you know, use those kind of like surveys to kind of like really roll it out, and you'll have a really much, much smoother experience.
Fantastic. We've got 4 minutes left, so there's a great one here from anonymous attendee about what about neurodivergence? Sometimes it can be hard to want to interact with others, especially stereotypical generic things. Those that find generic work conversation tedious and interesting. Yeah, some people absolutely hate sort of small talk. How can you support these individuals? A coffee date with people can sound like hell to some people. So yeah, I think that's a really good point actually. And Alice or Judith, if you want to, Alice, maybe with your recent role, it might be something that you'll want to jump in.
Yeah, well, I mean, I always joke and say that that kind of thing is my personal idea of hell. Because I want to stay home with my dog here and my book here, and then I'm very, very happy about it. I think the key thing for you to take away there is actually the word individual, because everyone is different. You know, when you factor in neurodivergence, it's very easy for us to say, oh, people who fall under this category aren't good at communication. And that's, as a rule, not true. And those stereotypes can be quite harmful just because we make assumptions and then judge people on them. And one of the things that you might find interesting to consider is, well, what are these people's interests? Like, how can we make it interesting? One of the things I mentioned in the slides was talking about people's hobbies and engaging, because if you ask me about something I'm not interested in, I will play nice, but I'm probably not going to remember that conversation. But if you ask me about houseplants or dogs or the book I'm reading, I'll be your best friend and I will talk your ear off, and I'll develop a genuine connection with you. So establishing who those people are fundamentally at its core and knowing them as people and not necessarily just colleagues is going to be a really good starting point for you. Is there anything that you'd add at a higher level, Judith?
Well, I might draw it back to that kind of like model around loneliness, and it kind of like feeds into what you said, Alice, already, is loneliness is there where we have a gap between the relationships we want and the relationships we have. And if I'm actually quite happy with the relationships that I want, but I don't engage like other people around me do, I don't have a problem. There's not a problem of loneliness here. That's more a problem of how you want to include a neurodivergent colleague into your workforce. And you kind of like need to start looking at slight, like you mentioned, like slightly different aspects. It's more, loneliness is a very subjective feeling, even if I don't engage with all the activities at work, doesn't mean I feel lonely. You need to ask the question, you need to be curious, you need to just get to know your team. Like Alice said, with all those tips and all the suggestions in the chat, keep an open mind, be curious, and keep the conversation going to find out where people have problems and maybe where they're fine as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Not everyone feels lonely in the same way that you do. Like if I try and
Exactly.
go hang out with my dad, he'd probably kick me out of his house. He wants to be by himself.
Oh,
I'm probably the same.
okay. Well, that brings us to the end of today's session. Fantastic session. Thank you so much, Judith and Alice. And thank you so much to our wonderful audience. I absolutely love it. It gives me goosebumps. I know I need to maybe get out more, but it does give me goosebumps when I see such an engaged chat and some fantastic ideas on there. So I will do what I can in the background to try and download all of this and share it when I share the link to the recording. But thank you so much for tuning in. Thank you to our wonderful panelists, and wishing you a lovely festive season, whatever that may look like for you.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, everyone.